I'm going to begin with a clip that was the point of departure for the larger project I wish to introduce to you today. It comes from a TED Talk delivered in March 2015 by computer scientist Rajiv Maheswaran.
What we're doing is turning our athletes into, you probably guessed it, moving dots. So we've got mountains of moving dots.
Maheswaran is the CEO of a corporation called Second Spectrum, founded in 2013. According to their website, shown here, data is revolutionizing the sports industry. But given the challenge of sifting through mountains of data in search of compelling stories, the company promises to create products that fuse cutting-edge design with spatiotemporal pattern recognition, machine learning, and computer vision to enable the next generation of sports insights and experiences. Today, just 3 years after the company's founding, half the franchises in the National Basketball Association, or NBA, use the company's platform of data, analytics, visualization, and video solutions. Second Spectrum is a major player in basketball analytics, the most significant development in the sport in the United States in recent years. Analytics began in the early 1990s when statistically minded basketball hobbyists used personal computers to access historical game data on the internet and developed estimates of the average point value of a possession and other novel metrics. On this basis, in the early 2000s, they created quantitative descriptive, diagnostic, and predictive models, like the one shown here, of the expected cost and gain of various elements of individual and team play. But in the last decade, digital technologies, like these offered by the company SportView, have supercharged these analytical capabilities. NBA franchises now draw upon digital surveillance technologies to track the movements of players and the ball, generating 800,000 data points per game. Augmented computational power then permits detailed analysis of this data by specialists who provide the results to coaches, personnel managers, and players themselves. And online digital platforms and tools allow journalists and fans to access, manipulate, and share these analyses. Let me give you a visual impression of the result. In the following slide, you'll see two videos playing side by side. On the left is a TV replay of the final seconds of a game between the San Antonio Spurs in black and the Cleveland Cavaliers in white. On the right is a visual simulation of the same play produced by combining images from the optical surveillance software I've just described with advanced statistical methods to show real-time variations in the expected point value of the possession as the play unfolds, which is graphed in the lower right of the right-hand image. I'll come back to reflect on this juxtaposition shortly, but for now, let me give a couple of other examples of how this ensemble of methods, machines, and money is transforming the sport. First, the number of three-point shots attempted has risen more sharply in recent years. This reflects the analytical insight that three-pointers, on average, generate more points per possession than all but the closest two-point attempts. Then, perhaps unsurprisingly, teams who are taking and making the most three-pointers, like the Golden State Warriors, not coincidentally also recently voted Best Analytics Organization, are winning the most games. And while all this has unfolded, the NBA has generated more revenues than ever before. The success of this optical surveillance technology has inspired tech entrepreneurs to search for new frontiers in data acquisition, which they appear to have found in the development of so-called wearables. These biometric devices measure physical attributes and gauge player movements, plotting them against ideal movement patterns. Not only do these devices track and quantify in fantastic detail the movements of players on the court and the condition of their bodies, but their companion software helps clubs turn this data into actionable information. In these ways, then, Second Spectrum's Maheswaran boasts that basketball analytics has, quote, quantified what was previously unquantifiable. And the narrator of this ad for biometrics firm Catapult states baldly the value of this. What you can measure, you can manage. Maheswaran, for his part, is more subtle. I believe, he asserts, that with the development of the science of moving dots, we will move better, we will move smarter, we will move forward. But who is this we, and what does he mean by better, smarter, and forward? He answers the question implicitly when, explaining this bubble chart that represents the shooting tendencies of all 450 NBA players, he insists that it's really important to know if the 47, he means the 47% shooter, that you're considering giving $100 million to is a good shooter who takes bad shots or a bad shooter who takes good shots. The knowledge analytics generates, then, is important for owners. It is for them that Second Spectrum first flattens athletes into moving dots and then transforms these dots into numbers on a spreadsheet. In fact, already back in 2005, analytics pioneer and current Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey explained that the aim of analytics was, quote, to generate wins for less dollars by minimizing risk and maximizing the expected value of both possessions and financial investments. Thus, whatever the aims of its practitioners, basketball analytics has, in effect, developed and has succeeded, as shown in this graph, to the degree that it has sold the NBA and its owners powerful tools for maximizing the value extracted from the league's labor force. Now, what historian Ian Hacking calls the taming of chance may well be a good thing for an NBA owner, and perhaps even, from a competitive or health standpoint, for an NBA player. And it may seem that analytics is an objectively superior way of understanding and evaluating basketball play, emerging inevitably from the progress of science. But this view fails to see the ways in which analytics is a culture, constituted by a set of framing values and presuppositions. The ostensible benefits of what I therefore call the culture of moving dots coexists uneasily with other effects that come to light when these technologies are viewed in the broader context of the emerging age of big data. The role of digitally based surveillance and biometric technologies in generating big data has spurred researchers in the humanities and social sciences to raise ethical and political questions concerning power differentials at work in the process by which data is acquired, constructed, transformed into narratives, and used to guide decisions. Within basketball, however, the culture of moving dots has taken shape, by and large, undisturbed by considerations of political or ethical, let alone aesthetic or narrative value. We might begin to remedy this by recalling that to count means not only to enumerate, but also to be significant. In this sense, the verb sits at the intersection of quantitative and qualitative reasoning, illuminating the possibility that what we count, and indeed the very act of counting, may not be all that counts. What happens, we might then ask, to that which may count for some, but which cannot be, or simply is not, counted within the culture of moving dots? This juxtaposition I showed earlier illustrates what philosopher Stephen Connor describes as a gap between the quality of the game as it is played and the quantitative register into which it is translated by the score. The two orders of quality and quantity, Connor continues, are in essence incommensurable, and he concludes that without the rational, there would be no way of apprehending the real, except as a vague and indefinite sense of forms and forces. He may be right about that, but he is wrong if he means that quantification is the only rational discourse available for apprehending the real. In fact, basketball's inventor, James Naismith himself, once provided a superb example of a non-quantitative yet still rational discourse that apprehended the qualitative, real complexity of basketball and pointedly contrasted it with the poverty of the score. The main interest in basketball, Naismith wrote in 1914, lies in watching the kaleidoscopic changes which take place. Every moment of a game is full of thrills when expert players handle the ball. We watch such a game with an increasing admiration for the wonderful capacity of the human frame for accomplishing the seemingly impossible. No amount of rough work, even if it should result in a goal for our side, can compare with such a spectacle. It is indeed a narrow mind that puts goals before grace, scores before skill. Indeed, aesthetic philosophy, born in the 18th century as a discourse of the body, may provide a powerful form of noise, an alternative language, challenging the growing hegemony of digital quantification in basketball. Let me illustrate this by turning to a concrete case in which counting and what counts, quantitative and qualitative reason, collide in basketball's historical imagination. By traditional metrics, shown here, Allen Iverson, a 6-foot guard who retired in 2010, would seem to be among the greatest ever to play. By the metrics of basketball analytics, however, Iverson rates considerably lower. In fact, in their popular 2006 book, The Wages of Wins, economists and statistical analysts David Berry, Martin Schmidt, and Stacy Brook determined that the net value of Iverson during his career is a bit below the average NBA player. In this slide, I've represented this negative reassessment of Iverson by creating a quantitative measure of the way analytics frequently characterizes him as an inefficient ball hog who monopolized the ball without making his team better for it. Not only, Berry and his co-authors concluded, is Iverson not one of the best players in the league, he has generally not been the most productive player on his own team. In basketball, they explained, wins are solely a function of offensive and defensive efficiency, and Iverson's efficiency measures are below average. In his influential review of Wages of Wins, Malcolm Gladwell struggled to sustain his appreciative vision of Allen Iverson driving again and again to the basket, twisting and turning and writhing through a thicket of arms and legs of much taller and heavier men. Stirring though these images may have been to Gladwell, in the end he retreats from their lure, ceding ground to the unavoidable reality of the numbers. All we learn, he concluded, is to appreciate twisting and turning and writhing. We become dance critics, blind to Iverson's dismal shooting percentage and his excessive turnovers, blind to the reality that the Philadelphia 76ers would be better off without him. Gladwell's evocative description of Iverson's play might fit within a long-standing tradition of appreciating the aesthetic value of basketball play. But within the culture of moving dots, such pleasures are relegated to the realm of illusions that must give way to reality, which is to say, to quantitative appraisals of efficiency. In this way, basketball analytics' quantitative assessments of value generate shifts in the criteria used to evaluate players of the past and the playing styles they are seen to embody. And in the case of Iverson, at least, this threatens to eclipse more than just an appreciation of the aesthetic value of his play. For Iverson was also widely viewed as the icon of the so-called hip-hop generation in basketball. For the NBA, these players presented both the promise of a new market of younger consumers and the threat of collapsing the global empire built on the racial crossover appeal of Michael Jordan. For some historians, the league's policies during this period amounted to a cynical assault on blackness that sought to monetize the street credibility of players like Iverson while policing their public persona and private behavior to avoid alienating the league's majority white fan base? If so, then Iverson's value in basketball history as a cultural and political icon might be rated alongside those of the pioneering black players who first desegregated the game in the early 1950s, and the first black superstars who transformed it in the 1960s. Considering the inextricability of racial politics in American society from the history of the sport, we should ask, does the culture of moving dots have the conceptual tools and vocabulary with which it could account for such matters? Given basketball analytics' growing role in conversations about the game, there is, I believe, a danger that important aesthetic, cultural, and political figures, moments, and issues in the game's history may be relegated to the margins. Conversations, after all, happen in language, and language not only reflects, but also constructs our ways of experiencing and acting in the world. In some ways, basketball analytics has introduced a new, and I confess, for me, fascinating language into the culture of basketball. The questions to ask then, as in any multilingual culture, are, first, what differentials of power allow certain languages to become dominant while subordinating others, and with them the ways of experiencing and acting in the world they inform and best convey? And second, how can we cultivate a requisite diversity of basketball languages with which to experience the sport? Thank you.